Welcome to the most in-depth guide of Tearlament you will ever see. We have one card combo guide, tier at full power, in-depth coaching session, card-by-card review, how to counter Tearlaments, how to build your deck. What are Tearlaments all about? It's all about a dude named Rhinoheart enslaving a bunch of Tearlament mermaids, forcing them to fuse when sent to the grave. Let's go. We're going to start this Tearlament guide with a one-card combo play using Rhinoheart. Now, do not worry. Later in the video, I'm going to go card by card, every Tearlament card that's relevant, and I'm going to be giving you tips on each card and how to use them. And to make this one-card combo more consistent, these are all the cards that you could play that could guarantee a fusion combo. We're going to start this off by normal summoning a Rhinoheart. On summon, it could send any Tearlament girl from the deck to the graveyard, which will trigger a fusion. TCG likes to send Havnis, but we don't have Sprite Sprind. I like to send Merly instead for my first fusion. We're going to activate the Merly, fusing ideally with the graveyard, but we have nothing else in the graveyard to fuse with, so we could use our hand, field in addition to the graveyard. Unfortunately, we have to use the most unoptimal, which would be the field. You do want to avoid that. It would be graveyard, hand, then fields. We're going to fuse into our Kid Kalos. On summon, it's going to activate to search our deck or send any Tearlament card. I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of options of what you could search and even send. But for this one card combo, we're going to be going for the common 8-card mill combo by searching for Merly. Now in discord.gg/masterduelmeta, I posted the math of what it was like in TCG OCG to do this one card combo versus what it's going to be like in Master Duel, where we have the Tearlaments and the millers that are semi-limited. TCG had a 96% chance to trigger a Tearlament. We only have an 85%, but that's not considering the Screamer Solic. Now, it is my opinion, even though we are nerfed, we're only 85%, it is still worth it to attempt this combo. We'll be adding our Merly to our hand, then we're going to activate our Kid Kalos second effect, which is going to send itself or any other card we control that's a monster to special summon a Tearlament from our hand or grave. Now, this is going to be triggering the third effect of Kid Kalos. This is why this card is banned. It's going to mill 5 in addition to Merly milling 3. So Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2, activate, milling 8 total cards. Now, if we look at our graveyard, that is a ton of good cards milled. Now, let's activate this properly. A lot of people will quickly put the Tearlaments on Chainlink 1. I think that is a mistake because they will then be at the bottom of the deck after we search twice. We want them to be at the top of the deck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Chainlink 1, make sure my deck gets shuffled after all of this concludes. Then I'm going to put my Tearlaments on the bottom of the deck to perform our fusion summon. And then I'm going to Chainlink block those to use our Solic to search for a monster. I'm going to be searching for Havnis, and then we are going to be concluding our fusion summoning by making a Rukalos. Rukalos is going to require a Kid Kalos, which is quite interesting because it's banned in TCG. That's why they're using King of the Swamp to replace it, returning them to the bottom of the deck to now make our Rukalos. Rukalos is going to be able to negate any effect that would special summon. So now we're going to conclude this by, many people would summon a Kaleido Heart here, but because I have a Merly on the field, I'm going to summon Kid Kalos again. Now in TCG, they have a much better card to summon, which is called Garura, which would allow you to draw a card off of the play that we're doing. We do not have that, unfortunately, and it's not coming. So Kid Kalos is going to be summoned. We're going to return the Sharon and a monster in the graveyard. Come forth and Shokan. We got Kid Kalos here. And we're going to resolve by adding our Solic, which will finally shuffle our deck. So all of the bottom of the deck Tearlaments are now shuffled, hopefully towards the top. Now my opponent has a response here. The Mad Lad has a Nibiru. Rukalos is the way to stop that Nibiru play. We're going to activate the Rukalos, which will negate, destroy, and we could send, not we can, we have to. You have to send a Tearlament card to the graveyard from the hand or graveyard. Now, I want to keep my Merly on the field so I can make Sprite Elf. So I'm going to be sending the Havnis because I do want to keep the trap. So Havnis to the graveyard, we already used its effect to fuse, so it's not going to activate again. And now we're going to be making our Sprite Elf. Elf is going to give targeting protection onto Rukalos so it cannot get impermanence. Elf is also, during the opponent's turn, going to be able to reborn a Merly to trigger mill 3 during the opponent's turn to get fusion summoning. Now, right now, because I have more than one Merly in the graveyard, it's okay to summon the Merly early. Otherwise, I probably would not. I would keep the Merly in the grave so I could summon it during the opponent's turn to trigger a fusion. But because we have Solic, it may even still be okay to summon it early. So Merly's here. We already activated to mill. Now we're going to send our Solic, set it in the back row. The Solic trap is absolutely nuts. It's a permanent negate. It triggers fusions, and you'll be seeing it in play right on their turn. So let's end our turn, and let's go to their turn. Now our opponent has a Impermanence. Impermanence cannot target the Rukalos, as I said, so he's is going to be negating the elf. That's okay. Now, after that, they're going to have a follow-up play. Super Polymerization. What the hell? Super Poly is going to be fusing with our field, sending the Rukalos and Merly to make a Dragostapelia. Now, Rukalos has another effect. Rukalos is going to re-summon back onto the field because it was sent to the graveyard. Also, since you sent our Merly, that's going to trigger a fusion summon. Come forth and get fusion. Let's resolve all that. We have a Kaleido Heart play. We could summon a Dragostapelia. I'm going to go for Kaleido Heart. We're going to return the Merly that's activating. You have to. And you do need a Rhino Heart as part of this play, or a King of the Swamp. And we're going to send one of our other Tearlaments back into the deck. Now, just like that, come forth, Kaleido Heart, the big boss monster of the deck, and the Rukalos is now back on the field. On summon, the Kaleido Heart's going to activate to shuffle a card your opponent controls back into the deck. So we're going to activate that to shuffle back in the Dragostapelia. Now, Dragostapelia is going to activate to negate, targeting our Rhino Heart on that negate. Now, instead of being negated, we are going to be chaining our Sulliek. Sulliek is going to activate to target the Dragostapelia, and then, on resolution, we're going to be sending the Kaleido Heart for its other effect. So it dodges the negate, and we negate, and the Kaleido Heart, if sent to the graveyard by card effect, is going to activate to resummon back on the field. Now, if we did not activate our effect here to shuffle, we would be able to now activate it to shuffle a card in the field back in the deck, but it's a hard once per turn. Now, what's happening right now is its other effect. When it's sent to the graveyard and reborn, its other effect is also to send a Tearlament card from your deck to the graveyard. Now, since the Merly already activated to fuse, you got to remember, you only got 3 girls, and they could only fuse once per turn. We have Havnis or Sharon to send to the graveyard. I'm going to send Havnis. Havnis is going to be activating, and because we have a Kit Kalos in the graveyard, I'm going to be fusing with it to make our own Dragostapelia. That is nuts. Now, my opponent's going to follow up with a branded fusion. That's where Rukalos comes into play. Rukalos is going to activate to negate the activation of the branded fusion. Now, unfortunately, that's a downside. That means if they have another branded fusion, they will be able to activate it. Now, we have to send a card we control to the graveyard or from the hand that's a Tearlament. The Rukalos is no longer fusion summoned, so it will not reborn itself. The Kaleido Heart hard once per turn was already sent to the graveyard. So we could still send the Rukalos to the graveyard to negate, but I think it would potentially be better to send our already activated Sulliek. So that's what I'm going to do. Sulliek to the graveyard to trigger its effect, and I'm going to be searching my deck for a Havnis. Havnis is going to be activatable if they activate a monster effect in the field. So it's an additional possible interruption play that we have. Now, the Mad Lad's going to follow up with his Alubur, activate the Alubur. You have to chain your Havnis to the activation of the monster on the field. Otherwise, if you chain the Dragostapelia, you're going to chain link block your Havnis. It's important to note that this is not a trigger effect. It is a quick effect that needs to be directly chained to the monster effect in the field. So the Havnis is going to activate to special summon on the field and mill 3. I'm also going to now activate the Dragostapelia to negate the Alubur so it will not be searching. Come forth and summon the Havnis, and then hopefully we get lucky enough to mill a monster that would trigger a fusion. We did not, so no fusion play there, but that is an additional option that we wanted to do. And with that, the Mad Lad's got nothing left on the hand or field that is relevant. Negated Alubur, gonna swing into the Kaleido Heart for a surrender. And just like that, let's hop into more plays. Now I'm about to show you the full power of Tearlament, and it's very important to note that I know it's tempting to just trigger all your millers, but you want to make Abyss Dweller if you can, ideally. Abyss Dweller before you activate your Agido or your Kelbeck to mill your opponent, otherwise they're probably going to beat you on your own turn. It could also be a good idea to trigger your millers only if you have a Keldo or Mudora on the field or in the graveyard. These cards could also help you make an Abyss Dweller. So I think the first instinct many people would have with this hand is they would want to summon the Diviner, send a miller, mill 5, and it's a lot of fun. But we're not playing to have fun, we're playing to win. We do not want to be triggering effects in the opponent's graveyard. So let's very carefully play this out. In this example, I'm going to be starting off with our Terraforming for our field spell. I'm also going to activate the King of the Swamp to grab a Polymerization. Now with the field spell, I'm going to be activating to search for our Rhino Heart. With Rhino Heart, that's going to be the safer play to make than summoning the Diviner. Don't worry, we're still going to make use of the Diviner. Now, with the Rhino Heart and the Scream, I'm going to Chain Link block the Rhino Heart from being negated by a card like Ash Blossom. So this will allow us to mill 3 and send a card from the deck to the graveyard. Let's check out what we milled and sent. Now, this is a miller, and a lot of you will get excited. You're going to want to start milling right now. I'm going to say no. I have a good enough hand and good enough plays to not have to trigger my Agido. Now, I also have double Tearlament. You may want to be triggering both if you were to play around a DD Crow or a Bestial, but I feel confident enough to trigger just one. So that's what we're going to do right here. We're going to activate to trigger, shuffle back into the deck, and I know it's hard to see through the replay, but we shuffled back our King of the Swamp and our Havnis to summon our Kid Kalos. Now, Kid Kalos on summon is going to be activating to search our deck for a Tearlament. We're going to activate searching for a Sharon. Why would we search for a Sharon? Sharon could send any monster from the hands of the graveyard to special summon onto the field, and it's a level 4. My ideal play is going to be, can I make a Kid Kalos? Okay. Can I make an Abyss Dweller? So right now, I'm only thinking about how do I make Abyss Dweller? So by grabbing that Sharon, that's going to be ideal. We're now going to use Sharon to discard the Diviner, mill 3, and lucky enough, we milled a Scream, so that's going to be helping us out, searching for another trap. And now we can make our Abyss Dweller. Now we could safely use the Kid Kalos to send itself to the graveyard to special summon a monster from the hand or grave. And then if we mill any of our millers, that's going to be the time when we want to trigger them because their graveyard is now shut off. If you're an absolute mad lad, you could use the Mudora to shuffle our shuffler, or if we had multiple shufflers in the graveyard, maybe it would be valid to do so to increase our chance to trigger our mill off of the Kid Kalos mill. So right now we're going to use the Kid Kalos, targeting itself to special summon the Merly, sending itself to the graveyard, triggering the Merly. We're now going to mill 8. We did not even trigger any of the millers, so we did miss out on that opportunity earlier, but it was the safer play. We did not want to mill the opponent's graveyard. So this is what we milled. Not that great, but an additional mill, though, we did actually trigger our Sharon. Sharon is going to be activating, and so is our Rhino Heart. Rhino Heart's going to be sending a Sulliek from the hands of the graveyard on the special summon, and that's also going to trigger its effect. We now have the Sharon resolving its fusion to go into a Kaleido Heart. Now, why would I go into Kaleido Heart instead of a Rukalos? It seems like not a good priority to do so. Well, because we have the field spell, or if we have the ability to make a Baron to floor, it is better to go into Kaleido Heart instead of the Rukalos. And the main reason for that is because with the field spell or the Baron to floor, you could trigger their effect or activate their effect to destroy your own Kaleido Heart so it could send itself to the graveyard, reborn itself, then it's going to activate to send the third Tearlament fusion girl from the deck to the graveyard to trigger a fusion. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to be triggering the field spell, popping it. We're going to be activating the Sulliek that was sent to the graveyard with the effect of the Rhino Heart to grab a Havnis from the deck to the hand. And the Rhino Heart was already activated this turn to send from the deck to the grave, so we're not going to do that, but that's okay. Activate the Kaleido Heart, come forth and summon. And the last card that we did not trigger was a Merly. So Merly is now going to be activating to fuse into Rukalos. If you have a King of the Swamp, that could be another good option to return back in the deck to leave your Kid Kalos in the graveyard. Now, it's also worth noting, and I know this will be annoying for a lot of you, but I'm controlling my monster zones in a specific way. I like putting Abyss Dweller in the middle, and then on the left or the right, I'm going to be summoning my Rukalos. The reason for that is I am positioning for my Sprite Elf. I want to make my Abyss Dweller and Rukalos untargetable. Now, let's get Lincoln off into our Sprite Elf to accomplish that play of making them both untargetable. We're now going to be special summoning a Merly from the graveyard because I could use the Elf to instead reborn a Diviner from my graveyard during the opponent's turn, which could, instead of just mill 3 with Merly, I could mill 5 with a Miller in addition to my Dweller turning off the opponent's graveyard. All right. And now, this is even better. If you're playing Polymerization, you do want to Palmerize sending your Rukalos to the graveyard plus a Tearlament to make a Dragostapelia, because the Rukalos is now going to reborn itself back on the field. Now, look at this field. This is absolute insanity. The Sulliek's going to be able to permanently negate any monster the opponent controls. The Kaleido Heart, if sent to the graveyard with the Sulliek, or if an Aqua is sent to the graveyard in any way, it's going to activate to send a card in the field back in the deck. The Dweller's going to completely turn off their graveyard graveyard, Dragostapelia will negate a monster. The Rikalos will be able to negate any special summon. If any Tearlament is shuffled back in our deck, the field spell is going to pop a card in the field, which could trigger with your shuffler whenever you want. We have the Sprite Elf protecting our monsters from being targeted to where it's pointing to. We also have the Scream. On summon, we're going to mill 3, which could trigger a fusion. If they activate a monster effect, we have the Havness, which will chain to it, summon, mill 3, maybe trigger a fusion. And with the Sprite Elf, we could summon the Diviner to not only trigger a miller, we could also instead send an Entis, which could pop a card on the field. This is what full power Tearlament looks like. All right, let's see what the opponent has. A Droplet. Now, it's going to be interesting to see the best way to play Dweller versus a Droplet. If we activated Dweller early, which I've seen a lot of TCG players do, you would then get chained onto with a Droplet, and then you will very likely be negated because there's nothing we could do. But in this instance, even with them sending a monster, I'm still going to be activating my Abyss Dweller. How the heck am I going to do that? Well, they're going to send to the graveyard a spell and 2 monsters. They did not send a trap. So if you are the Droplet player yourself, you better have a trap in your hand, because I'm going to chain the Sulliek, which is a continuous trap. We're just going to flip it up. And then I'm going to chain the Abyss Dweller, not to the Droplet because that's illegal. I'm going to chain it to my Sulliek. Very good. Now their graveyard is completely turned off. We lost our Dragostapelia. We lost our Rikalos. Our Elf is not going to reborn. It could only reborn during the main phase, but they did lose 3 cards. So this is the same play that you would do to a Dark Ruler No More. Dark Ruler No More, Chainlink 2 Sulliek, Chainlink 3 Dweller, turn off the grave. Now let's continue the plays. They're going to summon a Diviner. That's going to be triggering our Havness, which is a quick effect, not a trigger, so you have to activate this first. And then we're going to be using our Sulliek to negate. Negate, send the Kaleido, special summon the Havness, mill 3, and that's going to trigger the Kaleido to special summon onto the field, also trigger the Havness in the graveyard to fuse. Now it could fuse with our negated cards, return them back in the extra, and then reborn them. We're also going to be activating our Scream. Scream, get mill in. We're going to be replacing our Rikalos for a newly summoned Dragostapelia that's not negated. We are going to be replacing the Havness on the field for a Kit Kalos. Kid Kalos is going to activate. We're going to send from our deck to the graveyard with the effect of the Kaleido. We're going to search our send with the Kid Kalos. We're going to spin a card on the field back into the deck. This is after getting Dropleted or even Dark Ruler No More. Now we're going to be searching. Now I will admit that I did think I was resolving the effect of the, not the Sulliek, but the effect of the Kid Kalos. So I wanted to send them early because then the Kid Kalos could turn into a Rikalos, but we already pretty much auto win this game. We're going to also add a Havness here, and now he's going to set that back row. We're actually going to get rid of it. During the end phase, we're going to use a shuffler to at least shuffle 1 Tearlament back into our deck, and that's going to trigger our field spell. So get ready for that. Field spell, now activate, pop any card on the field, including our own. If we wanted to pop our Sulliek, if we didn't already trigger it, we could search a monster. We could have popped our Scream to search for a trap, pop our Kaleido Heart to reborn it onto the field if we already didn't do that. We're going to take out that back row card. It does not activate because you're under the Dweller. And that is full power Tearlament. What the hell, mate? Not even Droplet, not even Dark Ruler No More could stop this. Now for this segment, I'm going to be doing an in-depth detail on coaching you through this play on what you should do. We have a few options here. A lot of people may activate Mudora, send Kelbeck, then both players mill 5. You do have the Mudora to shuffle anything from their graveyard. You're also putting shufflers in their deck, potential millers which will further mill. It could be a bit disruptive when we could ideally just maybe plan to make a Dweller instead. Another option could be normal summon the Rhino Heart to then trigger a fusion. But then we're going to have to use our hand or field for the fusion summon, which would be an inefficient fusion. Our third option would be to activate our Sharon, but it could get ashed, and you generally want to bait lesser plays to eat up a disruption before making your main play. Because our hand is so good, even if we get ashed, we could still go Rhino, Kit Cal, Mudora, Kelbeck, so I do think it's worth going through with this. We're now going to activate our Sharon, and Sharon is going to be special summoning on resolution. And if you do special summon, you then send a monster from the hand to the graveyard, then you mill 3. So the special summon and send is at the same time, mill 3 happens afterward. Now, if you send Merly, you're going to then mill 3, but it's even better if we send the Rhino Heart instead of having to normal summon it, because then we have the option to normal summon our Mudora or Kelbeck, which could help lead into further extra deck plays. So I will be sending our Rhino Heart here, and now we're going to mill 3. Let's now perform our mill 3, and with the mill 3, we milled an Aqua, which is ideally what we wanted to mill at least one Aqua monster, which will be any of the Tearlaments besides Rhinoheart. Rhinoheart is now going to activate, special summoning itself onto the field, and then it's going to be sending a Merly to the graveyard. That will be triggering the Merly, and we could be activating the Rhinoheart also. We're going to activate Merly, and then we're going to be activating our Rhinoheart right now to be sending from the deck to the graveyard. So the big question here is, what do we send with the Rhinoheart? I think it's best to plan that we're going to have a mediocre or bad mill with our Kit Callus that we're about to do. So what I'm going to be doing is, instead of sending a Tearlament to perform a fusion, because we don't have an effective one since we don't have any other Aquas in the graveyard, I'm just going to send Merly from the deck to the graveyard, even though it's already activating. So we're going to use the Merly in the graveyard to go to the bottom of the deck alongside the King of the Swamp, and that's going to be summoning our Kit Callus. Now, the main reason we sent our Merly from the deck to the graveyard is because Kit Callus generally wants to search for a Merly, and why not get that out of the way with the Rhinoheart since we didn't have an effective fusion? Instead, I could send the Merly from the deck to the graveyard, and now our Kit Callus can search for a Scream or search for a Sulliek instead. We already activated Sharon, we already have access to the Merly, so with the Kit Callus effect, what I'm thinking of searching for, because ideally at the end of the turn, you want to be ending with the Sulliek. If I grab a Scream, you only generally want to grab this if you have a way to destroy it, or you already have a Sulliek in your hand. I do not have the field spell, and it does not look like I have a way to summon a Baron to floor, so instead of searching for the Scream, I'm just going to go straight into the Sulliek, because I'm planning on not having a very good mill. Now, of course, you could get rewarded if you search for a Scream instead with the additional 3 mill and having the ability to mill in your opponent's turn, that you may just end up milling the other Scream to search for a Sulliek anyway. Now, it's important to remember that we still have an active normal summon with the Mudora. We could also use the Mudora effect. We could use the Kit Callus to send itself to the graveyard to summon the Merly to then mill 8, but the next thing we want to do, because we got 2 level 4s, we're going to go right into our Abyss Dweller. My favorite spot for Abyss Dweller is going to be in the middle, then left or right. Then it's going to make the Abyss Dweller untargetable with your Sprite Elf. And now it's time for our big play. We're going to be activating our Kit Callus, which could target our Dweller or itself. We're going to target itself, and it's going to send itself to the graveyard, special summoning Merly onto the field. Merly and Kit Callus are now going to be activating, and we're going to be doing Chainlink 1 Kit Callus, Chainlink 2 Merly to mill 8. Mill. Let's check out our milled cards. Well, this wasn't that great, but we did get to trigger a Havnis. We now have a Shuffler, and the Rhinoheart we already activated. So we're going to be activating our Havnis right now. What do we want to be summoning with the Havnis? The main options here would be a Dragostapelia, a Kaleidoheart, or a Rukalos. Now, if you've been paying attention, we have activated the Merly and the Havnis, but we have not activated a Sharon. So if you summon a Kaleidoheart, which requires 3 monsters to summon, including a Rhinoheart, you're going to need a way to send it to the graveyard so it could reborn itself, then send the Sharon, then perform our 3rd fusion. I do not have a way to send this to the graveyard, so I'm going to think that the next best option here is going to be a Rukalos. Rukalos is going to be summoned on the left or the right, returning our Kit Callus or a King of the Swamp, and we're going to be returning our Havnis to the bottom of the deck. If they were to Nibiru right now, we have Rukalos to negate. Now that we have a Dweller on the field, we could safely activate the Mudora, discarding the Kelbeck to mill 5 for both players. Activate Mudora, discarding the Kelbeck, special summoning our Mudora. Now we're going to be activating our Kelbeck, but it's very important when activating the Kelbeck, you want to be chaining your Abyss Dweller to the Kelbeck. So we're going to be detaching the Dark Monster, so we keep our plus 500 attack boost, and now we're going to mill 5 for both players. Milling 5, mill. What did we get? We got a Sulliek, and we got a Mudora Shuffler in the graveyard. We also have a Diviner. That's very good. So we're going to activate the Sulliek to search, and the big question here is, what do we search? What do we want here? Well, if we look at our field, we have a Merly with a Mudora, and we happen to not use up our normal summon this game yet. That is crazy to even think about. So what I want to do is I want to get a level 4 monster. It could be a Sharon, it could be a Rhinoheart. I'm going to be grabbing a Rhinoheart in this situation. Even though we already activated both of its effects, we're going to then make our Elf. Elf is going to be going to pointing to where the Dweller and the Rukalos are, making them completely untargetable. We can now activate the Elf to special summon from the graveyard our Diviner. Now, the only thing we have not activated yet for fusion summoning is our Sharon. But do we want to mill 5 additional cards for our opponent? Let's say they actually have some good cards in their graveyard right now. We could, while they can't activate them before the next turn happens, we could banish our Mudora, pretending we just returned 3 cards back. Now we are going to activate our Diviner. So we want to think right now, is it worth it to send a Guido from the deck to the graveyard to mill an additional 5 with the hopes of just milling our 1 Sharon. We could have activated to also return our 2nd Sharon back in the deck. So for this instance, let's just put in another shuffler into the graveyard just to simplify this. To make the Diviner level 6, we can now normal summon our Rhinoheart, and with Rhinoheart and the Diviner, we can make a Baron de Fleur. And also during the opponent's turn, we're going to be able to activate the Elf only during the main phase. We could special summon the Diviner if we want to mill 5 by sending an Agito or a Kelbeck, or we could summon the Merly to mill just 3. With the Merly on the field, we could send it to the graveyard with the Sulliek, which could then trigger a fusion. We're now going to set our Sulliek. We're going to end our turn. It's going to go to our opponent's turn, and during their main phase 1, as soon as they pass priority by doing anything, we're going to want to be activating our Elf, and we're going to be thinking about when do we want to Abyss Dweller. I know a lot of people are going to feel like they want to use this right away. If you use Abyss Dweller right away, they chain Droplet, you're done. You're not going to be able to stop the Droplet, but if you wait and you respond to the Droplet instead, let's say they activate Droplet, you could chain your Sulliek, then chain your Abyss Dweller to your Sulliek, and thus you're turning off their graveyard. You could also now chain your Sprite Elf. So Elf could summon a monster from the graveyard. Let's say it is the Diviners, because maybe we want to mill 5 cards here instead of 3. So right here, we're going to activate, sending the Agito. Agito's going to activate, and we're going to mill 5 right here. Let's shuffle this up, /mill 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was a Sharon. There is the Scream. So the Sharon right now can return to the bottom of the deck alongside our Rhinoheart and another Aqua monster like the Sharon or the King of the Swamp. To the bottom we go. And then we're going to be summoning our Kaleido Heart. Kaleido Heart is here, activating on summon to spin a card on the field back into the deck. Now, what if there's nothing worth spinning? Well, you could hold on to the effect and wait for it to be sent to the graveyard. You could send it to the graveyard with your Sulliek by negating a monster. You could send it to the graveyard with the effect of your Rukalos by negating an effect that would special summon. And when it's sent to the graveyard by either of these effects, it's going to activate special summoning back onto the field, which is going to be another opportunity to spin a card in the field. But in addition to that, your Kaleido Heart is going to also send a monster from the deck to the graveyard, or a spell or a trap, whatever you want to send. That's a Tearlament. So let's say we send a Havnis. You could activate the Havnis, and with the Havnis activating, we could summon a Dragostapelia using the Rukalos because we already used up its negate effect, so we don't even need it right now. To the extra deck, to the bottom of the deck we go, and now we have our Dragostapelia ready to negate another monster on top of us already. We possibly negated something with the Rukalos. You could also, with the Diviner, instead of milling, you also have the option to send an Entis. Maybe you want to pop a card in the field instead. We are now going to be doing a card breakdown and tips and tricks with each card. Tearlaments, Rhinoheart. On summon, you could send a Tearlament monster from your deck to the graveyard except itself. So you're going to have to just send the Tearlament girls. You cannot send the spell or trap. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you special summon. If you do, send a Tearlament card from your hand to your graveyard. Now, when you see any monster being level 4, you want to immediately think Dweller. Rhinoheart being able to special summon and be one of your main normal summons, that's going to be one of the main ways to make your Abyss Dweller. Also, it being a water will boost up your Dweller and your water monsters by 500. So there's a few tips and tricks I want to show you with this. If you have a play like this, you're activating your Kit Kalos. The Kit Kalos, instead of adding a monster, if you have a hand like this, you could instead send the Rhinoheart from the deck to the graveyard, and then the Rhinoheart's going to be activating in the grave as a special summon by discarding the Sulliek. And then you're going to be able to trigger the effect of your Sulliek, trigger the effect of your Rhinoheart, and you still have your normal summon freed up. A small little tip with Rhinoheart is to activate in the graveyard, you must have a Tearlament in your hand that you could discard. So in this instance, we'll declare a Rhinoheart that was sent to the graveyard, but you could then chain a card or on a higher chain link, deal with the card in your hand, and then your Rhinoheart in the graveyard will still special summon. It will still activate to send a Tearlament from the deck to the graveyard, but now you didn't have to discard. Level 2, Merly. What is good with Merly? On summon, you send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard, and just like the main 3 Tearlament girls that she is a part of, she will trigger into fusion summoning if she is sent to the grave by card effect. So the main thing you want to know with her is that she's usually comboed up with the Kit Kalos sending itself to the graveyard, special summoning the Merly to do the mill 8 combo. It's also worth noting that she's going to be the main way to make a Sprite Elf. And with Sprite Elf during the opponent's turn, you're going to be summoning the Merly to trigger the effect to mill 3 during the opponent's turn. Also, we don't have this yet, but Sprite Sprind is going to be a card that you're going to make to send a Merly from your deck to the graveyard graveyard to trigger the effect of Fusion Summon. Level 3 Havness. Now, what is good with this one? It's got the same effect as the main 3 Tearlament girls, and I want you to note that it has 1600 attack. I'm going to say this once, but you can essentially boost up your field by plus 1500 onto any of your girls. So this 1600 attack is essentially 3100 if you pair it up with a Dweller that has a water monster to boost by 500, with the field spell for an additional 500, and if you have a Scream, which is going to reduce your opponent's monsters by 500 attack. Now, her main difference between the other Tearlament girls is that she has the quick effect, not a trigger effect. This means that it could be chain link blocked. It must be the direct chain link to a card effect on the field that's a monster activating. If it successfully gets to activate, it special summons, then mills 3 to hopefully trigger your millers, send your shufflers, or trigger fusion summons. Now, what's important about it being a quick effect is, let's say your opponent normal summons a Rhino Heart activates. You get to chain the Havness, right? No, you gotta wait to see if they have any other trigger effects like a Scream. If they put Scream on chain link 2 to their chain link 1 Rhino Heart, you just got chain link blocked, and that's something that you should do against opposing Havness. The final Tearlament girl, Sharon, and it being level 4, again, that's going to be a good option to use with Abyss Dweller. Its effect is to activate from the hand, wait for a response, then it could special summon as a level 4 for your Abyss Dweller play, and you're also going to send a monster from your hand to the graveyard, which will be a card effect. That's triggering your Tearlament effects because you're not sending by a cost. This is also going to be triggering your millers. It also helps get a shuffler in the graveyard. It could also get your diviner in the graveyard so you could reborn with an elf. And then on top of that, you're going to mill 3 cards from your deck to the graveyard. If your hand is Sharon, Havness, and a Rhino Heart, what you usually want to do is you want the Sharon to discard the Rhino Heart. Then Rhino Heart will discard the Havness. Now you have 2 level 4 monsters on the field, the Rhino Heart and Sharon to make a Dweller. You haven't even used up your normal summon yet. You'll be triggering your Havness. You'll also be triggering your Rhino Heart to send from the deck to the graveyard, and you also milled 3. That is one of the most powerful opening plays that Tearlaments could do. Keldo and Mudora are almost as good as Abyss Dweller in countering the Tearlament mirror match. In addition to both of them having the quick effect of shuffling 3 cards from either player's graveyard back into the deck, which stops the opponent's fusions, they could both help you summon Abyss Dweller by discarding another Earth Fairy from the hand to special summon themselves onto the field. And when Keldo special summons onto the field, it has the additional effect of also searching your deck for another Earth Fairy. Also, do not underestimate just normal summoning one of these before making your plays. If you're going to be triggering your Agido and Kelbeck, you need to have a Dweller or a Shuffler on the field or in the graveyard. It is so important to know with Agido that Agido is so good at summoning Abyss Dweller. If you activate your Agido or your Kelbeck to mill from your opponent's deck and yours, your Agido is going to activate in your hand, special summoning onto the field, and also special summoning another level 4 Earth Fairy from your graveyard. That's instant Abyss Dweller. Do not underestimate the ability for Kelbeck to spin a special summon monster on the field back to the hand. One of my favorite cards to spin back to the hand in the mirror match is going to be an Abyss Dweller. So if they make a Dweller and then they mill or send any card from their hand or deck to the graveyard, you're now going to Kelbeck, spin back that Dweller, and hopefully they're not going to be able to make another one. And because of that, you also have to play around that yourself. I know it's going to be difficult when you rush to make a Dweller, then you trigger a mill, then they're going to spin back your Dweller. You do want to maybe trigger a mill, see if they have the Kelbeck, then go into a Dweller. It's also very important with your shufflers to sometimes shuffle your own card back into the deck. If, let's say, you have your Sulliek in the graveyard and you would possibly mill a Scream, you might want to return your Sulliek back in the deck. That way, when you trigger your Scream, you're going to be able to search it. Kit Kalos, the only banned Tearlament within the TCG and OCG. I'm going to group this up with the card Instant Fusion. Instant Fusion, instantly summoning her, not using up one of your main 3 Tearlament effects to fuse, and that is going to be able to search or send any Tearlament card, not monster. You could also then target a monster you controlled, not itself. It could be itself, to then special summon a Tearlament from not just the hand, but also the graveyard, and then you're going to send the targeted monster to the graveyard, and if this is sent to the graveyard, you're going to mill 5 cards. The famous Kit Kalos Search Merly Summon Merly Mill 8 combo you have off of this play. You could search for a Scream. If you have a way with the, let's say you have the field spell, or you have a way to make a Baron to floor, any way to destroy your own Scream, you're going to want to make use of the Scream with the Kit Kalos to mill an additional 3, and then when it's sent to the graveyard through destroying it yourself, you're then going to be able to search for a card like the Sulliek. In many instances, you may just want to search your Sulliek. I think there's no shame in searching the Sulliek and then using the Sulliek on your opponent's turn to send the Kid Kalos to mill 5 on your opponent's turn instead of your own to ensure you have the Sulliek. But ideally, you would be able to at least trigger the Kid Kalos on your turn and set the Sulliek on your turn also. You cannot search the field spell with the Kid Kalos. That's a very important thing to know with the Kid Kalos. Otherwise, that's what you would be searching every time. If you have not activated your Rhino Heart yet, I think it is in most cases going to be better to search for your Rhino Heart than your Merly instead to then special summon it onto the field. If you have a good monster in your hand that you want to discard, even searching for a Sharon could be better than a Merly. Also, if you do not have Abyss Dweller on the field yet, you may want to consider using the Kid Kalos to special summon a level 4 onto the field to make that Abyss Dweller instead of going Merly into Elf. Rue Kalos, for some reason, has this additional not needed effect of your other Aqua monsters can't be destroyed by battle, completely extra. And the nuts effect about this is your opponent activates a card or effect that includes special summoning. You're going to quick effect negate. You have to be the direct chain link to it, which means if they have multiple trigger effects, let's say a Tearlament and another card they put on chain link 2, this will be chain link blocked. You will not be able to negate, which means you also want to do that to an opposing Rue Kalos. Chain link block your effects that include special summoning. Now, what's very important about this effect is the second effect is if this fusion summoned card is sent to the graveyard, even through its own card effect, which happens after you negate something, you send a Tearlament card from your field or hand to the graveyard, which will trigger their effect. You could special summon this card from the grave. So if it is special summoned from the grave through its own effect, it's no longer fusion summoned. It will not special summon back onto the field. What's very cool about this fusion summoned effect is if your opponent uses a super polymerization on you, it's now going to reborn from the graveyard back onto the field. Another cool thing about it, let's say your Rue Kalos is negated by a droplet. Do you have a way to get your Rue Kalos into the graveyard, then reborn it? It's no longer negated. Another great thing about this effect is if you have polymerization, let's say you're playing King of the Swamp, you're going to use polymerization and you could then summon a Dragostapelia. Dragostapelia is going to be an additional monster negate, and then she's going to reborn herself right back onto the field. Now, initially summoning her, you do want to be careful. Ideally, you're not using Kid Kalos on the field to fuse into her, because if you do that, you're missing out on the ability to mill 5. So what's very cool about the King of the Swamp is you could have Kid Kalos on the field, trigger a fusion, and not using your Kid Kalos, you could use a King of the Swamp on the graveyard instead, summon your Rue Kalos, keep your Kid Kalos on the field, so you could then activate the Kid Kalos at your own timing to then send itself to the graveyard, special summon a Tearlament to then mill 5 up to 8. Now, the big boss monster, Kaleido Heart, is going to require 3 monsters. Now, Rhino Heart is not an Aqua, so Rhino Heart's going to be a warrior. It's going to be one of the fusion materials, or you could use a King of the Swamp to help assist in the fusion summon of this on special summon. Or if an Aqua is sent to your graveyard by a card effect, you can target one card your opponent controls, shuffle it back into the deck. Also, if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, it special summons, which could trigger the first effect if you didn't do it on its initial fusion. But it also has an additional effect. It could send any Tearlament card, just kind of like Kid Kalos, but you don't search, any Tearlament card from your deck to the graveyard. So you do want to trigger this effect on your turn or your opponent's turn. Now, the main 2 ways to get your Kaleido Heart in the graveyard on your own turn is going to be through your field spell or your Baron de Flor to destroy it. It's very important to note that this card cannot be used as fusion material. You cannot use polymerization to trigger it, but also your opponent cannot use super polymerization onto your Kaleido Heart. So when it gets reborn from the graveyard, you're going to be using its effect to either search for a Tearlament trap by sending a Scream or triggering possibly your 3rd fusion effect. During your opponent's turn, the main way to trigger the graveyard effect of reborning is going to be through your Sulliek to negate a monster or your Rue Kalos after you negate an effect to special summon. Now let's talk about the field spell. Primeval Planet. When activated, add a Tearlament from your deck to your hand. Also, your fusion monsters, even your non-Tearlaments and your Tearlaments, gain 500 attack. And a very cool effect is if a Tearlament is returned back into your deck, including your extra deck, you could destroy any card on the field. We just talked about using this on your own Kaleido Heart, but another card to use this on is on your Scream. So if you pop your own Scream, you can now search your deck for any Tearlament trap. That's a very good play to do on your very first turn. During your opponent's turn, the best way to trigger this to pop a card in the field is going to be trigger any of your Tearlament fusions, or whenever you want, Keldo, Mudora, return a Tearlament back into the deck, and then this is going to activate to pop a card on the field. You will definitely be playing Terraforming to be searching for your Planet Field spell, and you will generally be searching for a Rhino Heart or Sharon with your Tearlament search. Now we got Sulliek. The main way to search this card is going to be through your Kit Kalos searching it or your Scream being sent to the graveyard, which will also search it. This card is nuts. Continuous. Because it's continuous, that is why you could use it to counter cards like Droplet or Dark Ruler No More, where you can't chain a monster effect to these cards generally. If they don't send a trap with a Droplet, what you're going to do is you're going to flip up your Sulliek, then you're going to chain your Abyss Dweller to the effect of your card that is just being flipped up so you could turn off their graveyard. And then its second effect is a permanent negate. Negate a monster on the field, then send a monster you control to the graveyard, which will be triggering your Tearlament cards, triggering your Kaleido Heart, as we were saying, to then reborn on the field, spin, send from the deck to the grave, fusion summon. It's nuts. And if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, I mean, everything is just so good about this. You're going to search your deck for a Tearlament monster. So you could discard this with your Rhino Heart being reborn from the graveyard. You could just mill this card and search your deck. What I really like to play is the Foolish Burial Goods. It's going to make the deck a lot more consistent. Look at that, semi-limited in Japan. Send the Sulliek from the deck to the grave, and now it doesn't even feel like your cards are semi-limited. You could search for your Sharon. Now, Crime is a card that some people did not play in the main deck, but if not, they probably had it in the side deck. This is going to be the counter trap that just stops anything. Spell, trap, monster effect. You are going to negate, and not only negate, you're going to shuffle it back into the deck. Not destroy, not triggering any card effects. Now, the downside is you have to have a monster in your hand to even activate this. So you may go nuts turn one and have nothing in your hand to show for it. Thus, your Crime would not be activatable. Its other effect is not that amazing, but it could be decent because our Kit Kalos is limited to one. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you could return your banished Kit Kalos back into the extra deck or any of your other Tearlaments. Just like the Sulliek, the main way to search this card is going to be through the Scream being milled or your Kit Kalos straight up searching it. This card's going to be good for stopping cards like Evenly Match if you do not want your entire field banished. And to wrap up the card review, we have Grief. Grief is kind of like a Foolish Burial. You special summon the Tearlament from your deck, and then you have to send a monster you control with the same type or attribute to the graveyard. Thus, if you have nothing on the field, it's just summon onto the field straight to the grave, which could trigger a Tearlament effect to fuse, or you could just get your Rhino Heart in the graveyard, discard a Tearlament from the hand, special summon it, and that's a good way to play around your normal summon. Then you have Tearlament Heartbeat. Target a spell or trap card in the field, and then shuffle it back into the deck. And you do have to have a card from your hand to send to the graveyard to even activate this, because then you do that. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you could recycle one of your Tearlament traps. That could be very good if just having this in the deck, it gets milled. You could add one of your traps in the graveyard back to your hand, just like a Scream search. And this card, not going to be searchable with Scream, but searchable with Kit Kalos. If you are getting floodgated, but you could make a Kit Kalos search for your Heartbeat, that could be a really good way to out something. We now have Tearlament Noise. This is going to be good for flipping a monster your opponent controls face down. Let's say you're playing against Sprite. They summon, flip their monster face down, and they cannot special summon their sprites alongside it. And if this card's sent to the graveyard, you get to recycle a Tearlament monster in your graveyard back to your hand. Moo Dragon. Two monsters, same attribute, but different types. This could be good with Super Polymerization. We're not getting the Garura, unfortunately, which is very good in the deck. Good for making Sprite Elf with, also using with Super Poly. But what's great about the Swamp is it's level 4. So that's going to be making a Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller get boosted by it being water plus 500. And then we also have Dragostapelia. This is going to be really good if you have a King of the Swamp, for example. You use that to make Rukalos. You now have Kit Kalos in the graveyard. You shuffle your Kit Kalos back in the extra. You now have a Dragostapelia. If your field gets Dark Ruler No More, or you use up a Dragostapelia or a Rukalos, your further fusion summoning on your opponent's turn could be more Dragostapelias to negate a monster on the field. It not only negates, it is a soft once per turn. Turns your opponent's monster into a level 1, so it's no longer level 2 or level 4 to make a Dweller or special summon the sprites. Time Thief Redoer. If you're milling your opponent's deck early on and you see that they're not playing Tearlament, maybe you want to summon a Time Thief Redoer instead of your Abyss Dweller with the Sharon under it. The Redoer detaches as an effect to then trigger a fusion summon, where normally you'd be detaching as a cost. If you get lucky, you could equip a trap off the top of your opponent's deck onto this during their standby phase. Then you have non-targeting removal. If you equip a spell, you're going to be able to also draw a card. Baguska. If you get Dimension Shifted, so you are now, everything's going to get banished. You don't want to make any plays. Well, Bagooska is going to be the play that you want to make. Not only while Bagooska is in defense will that be a good way to shut down your opponent because all monsters will go to defense and they will be negated. In attack position, it cannot be targeted, which means this is going to be probably the best way to summon a Zeus. So you swing in with Bagooska, and now you're Zeusing. Now, I do want to note that Avermax is going to be a potential problem for Tearlament. Zeus could be a great way to deal with an opponent's Avermax. And if you're in trouble, you could make 2 rank 4 exceeds, or just, at least have one of them on the field, swing into the Avermax, your monster dies, then you make a new rank 4 exceed in main phase 2, and that newly summoned monster could make your Zeus, then Zeus can get wiped. Starting off with countering Tearlament, we have countering Kit Cal. Kit Kalos is going to be the search and sending itself to the graveyard to reborn a monster, and also milling 5. So if you have Effect Veiler, if you have Impermanence, even if you have Moonlit Chill, you will be negating all of that. It's not going to have a good way to send itself to the graveyard by card effect. It's not going to be able to search. It's not going to be able to special summon a Tearlament onto the field. So these are very good cards to stop that Kit Kalos. I broke this up into tier 1 counters, tier 2 counters, and try-hard counters. The DD Crow cannot be chain link blocked. You're going to target the monster that's activating in the graveyard to fuse. You're going to banish it. That's it. No fusion. Max C. Yeah. Okay. The Shufflers, just like DD Crow, they do not get chain link blocked. You target the monster that wants to be activating, that is activating, shuffle it back. Very good counter. Dimension Shifter, they got to pass their turn. If you get Dimension Shifter, you're going to have to make Bagooska, then pass. We do not have Bystials. We're not getting Bystials yet, but when we get Bystials, just like DD Crow, it's going to replace DD Crow. This will be a good counter. Now, Tearlament's generally going to end on 2 to 3 monsters. So Lava Golem, tier 1 counter, tribute their field, and their card like Rukalos is not going to resummon. Abyss Dweller, top tier, tier 1 counter. Mirror Match, you're summoning this as your main priority. Tier 2 counters, the Sphere mode. Why is it not tier 1 like Lava Golem? Well, they might just end on 2 monsters and this will not be summonable. Ghost Spell can be chain link blocked, so it's not as good as DD Crow. The Ghost Reaper, if you're playing Kit Kalos, you could banish their Kit Kalos from their extra. That's going to be a very good play. Necro Valley is good to stop them from moving cards from the graveyard. Evenly Matched can really mess up their field. They're not going to have a good out to this unless they are main decking Crime. So if enough of you evenly match them, then we're going to have to start putting Crime into our Tearlament deck. Another very good counters is just big monsters that cannot be targeted. So Giant Avermax, we got Giant Arrival. Those are going to be good counters against Tearlament. Now, some try-hard counters against Tearlament. If you want to be crazy, you want to be a mad lad, then Nico Main King. If this card is sent to the graveyard by your opponent's mill, it now ends the turn, but it doesn't end the turn. It actually puts them in the end phase, so they're still going to perform their fusion summoning just during the end phase. Now, what the heck is up with this? The Newman, the Fortress Weapon, the end of Anubis, they're all connected together. So neither player can special summon with 1800 or more attack, cards can't be sent from the deck to the graveyard, and your monster effects in the graveyard are negated. Why are they all tied together? Because of the Mannequin Cat. So as a Tearlament player, if you summon a Dark Monster or Aqua against a Mannequin Cat on the field, it's going to summon the Newman, then you're done. It's going to summon the Fortress Weapon or the end of Anubis. So those are going to be interesting cards, or the Mannequin Cat could trigger itself by summoning one of those, the Dark or an Aqua onto your side of the field. Dimension Fissure, Macrocosmos, everything gets banished. Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, your Dark Monster in the graveyard are negated. Soul Drain, the monsters in the graveyard cannot be activated. They are going to be not negated, just can't activate. You have Dimension Ground. This turn, any monster sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So if they have Cosmic Cyclone or Field Spell pop this, they're still locked out for the entire turn pretty much. Silent Graveyard, very good. Discard 1 card. Effects that activate in the graveyard this turn are negated. You'll just chain this after milling if you want to. Do not play this card. It only sounds good. It is not good. If a card is sent from the deck to the graveyard, you essentially then make it so neither player could send cards from the deck to the graveyard for the rest of this turn. How's it not good? Well, it only gets triggered after a card is already sent to the graveyard, so you're performing a fusion. And let's say you send your Agito. Agito is going to activate, and then this will activate. Right? Wrong. This will be chain link 1. Agito will be chain link 2. So you will further mill, and then this will go into effect after they have already milled with their Agito. And also, you're targeting a card in the graveyard to shuffle it in the deck. You're not even stopping a Tearlament fusion with this because you're chain link 1. So chain link 2 or higher, Tearlament fusion, it's gone. Welcome to the deck building part of Tearlament. This is what I believe to be the core way to play Tearlament Ishizu. At least this at minimum. I think you're going to have to play all of these. The extra deck included, pretty much just like this. If you're not playing Super Poly, the Mood Dragon without the Bystials could be, you know, a little less important. Making use of Dark's going to be a bit rarer because you're not making a Sprite Sprint with it. With Elf, you're generally going to be making the Merly with it anyway. Now, let's see, why am I basing it off of this? Well, instead of just saying, trust me, bro, I'm going to show you the deck list of Japan and TCG on why we came up with this core, and then I'm going to show you my own deck list and other ideas on how you could play this deck. So if we're looking at this, this is a first place deck list. This is the last time TCG could play Tearlament before the deck got super banned. So looking like this, not maxed out on the Ishizu cards. It did not play a third Agido, and this is the extra deck. They got the Garura, which is a big deal. The Bystials being able to counter. The mirror match is very, very good. He's got a Meta Noise in here to flip a monster face down, but that's because Kashtira was in the event. Here you go, Kashtira. So flipping them down was good. And then we have another YCS where their deck looked like this. Now, believe it or not, he was not playing the where's Agido and where is the Herald of Orange Light? Well, he had the Orange Light at 3 in the extra deck, the side deck that is, playing Crime instead of the Meta Noise. This is going to be good for big blowout cards like Dark Ruler No More or even an Evenly Matched. Now, you may be looking at the Heartbeat. What's up with the Heartbeat? Well, people were playing Mystic Mine. So a good out to Mystic Mine would be the Heartbeat to spin it back. So otherwise, should we even bother with that? He's got the Scream, Max Field Spell. We don't have that, which is also good for dealing with Floodgates. Let's look at one more deck list here. Here's one where he's playing Diviner with Triple Herald of Orange Light. I like Diviner. I think we're going to make use of Diviner in our builds, but I wouldn't say it's a core part of the main deck. Now, here's some Japanese lists. This list is making use of a very little amount of the Bystials. Of course, they got the Max C, so that's the big difference here. They don't have the Garura in Japan either, so that's kind of funny. They can't make efficient Sprite Elves like we can. They like playing Goddess. Goddess deals with Avermax. Avermax is a very good counter to Tearlament if they don't have an extra deck counter to it. Otherwise, they're going to have to try to make Zeus or beat over it with a non-special summon monster with a Scream. We have another Japanese look at this. What the? Cherries to banish the Kit Kalos. We have the Moonlit Chill and the Impermanence to negate Kit Kalos. Very cool. All right, let's look at two more deck lists here and I'll show you mine. This is playing King of the Swamp because Kit Kalos banned. Banned Kit Kalos, so this is considered to be a Kit Kalos. It's also considered to be a Grapha. The deck's also playing the Shadows. Shadow being used with the Tearlament makes Winda. You can only special summon once while Winda's out on the field, so that's very good. Double Sulliek, no Crime. Very nice. Their cards are limited up, so I feel like our decks are going to look more similar to this than TCG. They have one field spell. They have the Foolish Burial Good semi-limited, still playing at the max copies there. And the last deck list will be this one. Triple Sulliek. That is a Meta Noise right there. Okay, interesting. Okay, very good. Now, personally, this is a deck list I'll be trying out on day one. The differences between the other builds, I'm playing 2 Diviner. What I like about this is I could get a Shuffler in the graveyard, then I could start milling, so it's not as good as a Dweller, but it could kind of cover if you don't have Dweller, then it becomes level 6, helping you make a Baron to floor. I like the Foolish Burial Good sending the Sulliek. I like maxing out on the Sulliek and the Scream. I probably will put in more hand traps beyond this. I just wanted to make this really consistent, showcase what the deck could do. Another point of contention here is, come on, DK, don't you know this was only to be for Kit Kalos? No, there are some lists that were using this even with Kit Kalos, and if I have Kit Kalos in the field and I mill really well, I like using this to make a Root Kalos with Kit on the field. I also like using this to help make our Kaleido Heart a lot more consistently, and also, just another Aqua monster in the graveyard. Sometimes I'm just begging to mill an Aqua. So with missing the third copy of Havnis, Sharon, and the Merly, I feel like the King of the Swamp is perfect for that. Just 1, 2, 3, the last 3 copies. And the Polymerization with King of the Swamp is so good. Turn 2, you got Chimera, pop a card in the field, draw 2, or pop 2, draw 1. With Polymerization turn 1, you're adding to the field an extra Dragostapelia. How's it extra? Well, normally people end with the Rukalos with no effect used of it being reborn from the graveyard, so it's fusion summoned. Use with it right now with the Polymerization. Make a Dragostapelia, then she reborns from the graveyard. You saw that in the replays. I like the Foolish Burial for added consistency. Even if, I want to get just a Shuffler in the graveyard before I start triggering my mills, because, it's very important to emphasize. cards. Dweller and Shufflers before you mill for your opponent, otherwise you have no other choice. The Scream is good for, you know, mill 3. It's understated that this is so good on your opponent's turn. They summon, you're triggering a fusion possibly, and getting that Sullik into your hand. Now, some other options with the deck are going to be, I'm thinking about playing Crime. If people are going to play blowouts like evenly matched, not that it auto wins against me, but it's going to put me very much far behind, I could just negate it with Crime. I am thinking about playing Salvation. Salvation is very good because if it's in the graveyard, you banish it to add an Aqua Crystal Beast, which works with your fusions, and you add the field spell. So if the field spell's in the graveyard and the Crystal Beast in the graveyard, use the Shuffler to return them back in the deck, and then Salvation, add the field spell to your hand. Very good. Super Poly is something to possibly consider. The problem with Super Poly is Recallus reborns itself when you Super Poly. Kaleido cannot be Super Polyed, but being able to Super Poly against an Abyss Dweller before it activates, that is very good. There's really just no counter to that. And another thing to consider here is the branded package. Anaconda was banned in TCG and OCG. They didn't have access to this. So if you were to make an Anaconda and just dump your one branded fusion, you now have a Mirror Jade on the field. And then if you draw into the branded fusion, you can go into a Lubellion. Lubellion could discard any of your millers, your shufflers. It is discarding by a cost, not by a card effect. And you're also going to have the Fallen Albaz, which you could just normal summon fusion with your opponent. Lubellion could also be made with King of the Swamp in a build like this to then, you know, get a miller from your hand into the graveyard. I like Dark, but without Sprind, I feel like the need for it is not as much. I'm between Dark and the second Dragostapelia. And yeah, what else is good here? Winda with the Shadow package. You would want to be playing Squamata with this. I would think that'd be very good. If you summon this, you could be disrupting your own plays if you're not careful. You really have to make sure that this is your final summon of your turn, or make sure to summon it during your opponent's turn. So that could be quite annoying there. I am considering main deck in the cherries. This is ultra rare though. Your opponent controls more monsters than you do, then you get to banish all the Kid Kalos from their deck. Their extra deck, that is. And there you go. I gave you the Japanese, the TCG, my own take on it with some other variations you could toss in. It is worth noting that Chaos Ruler is allowed to be played where it's banned in TCG. It wasn't really used in Japan, even though it's legal in Japan. Curious is also another card you could potentially be using with Dangers. Dangers are pretty much fully unlimited in Master Duel, so you could easily summon with that, also trigger your Tearlaments with it. And this card's going to be good for, let's say, you send from the deck to the graveyard a Fairy Tale Snow. Snow's going to be a very good idea to put into your deck list. You could also send a card like Eradicator. Get Eradicator Epidemic Virus from the graveyard, then add it back to the hand with your Griffin that you're going to make with the Curious, and then make this into the main monster zone ideally, so you're not linked up with them and their special summon monsters cannot activate. With the Chaos Ruler engine, you'd be wanting to add the Punk cards into your deck here, but you know, the Ishizu cards, they're just so good. You don't want at the cost of the Ishizu cards. If you could take out the other stuff for it, then sure, you could fit it in. And there you go. That is my in-depth Tearlament guide showing you one card combo, showing you in-depth gameplay, coaching myself, pretending it's you, in-depth card by card analysis, how to counter the deck building, what to consider. And the only thing left for you to do is watch tournament gameplay on twitch.tv/Decade. We're going to have a big tournament this Saturday of the week of this guide being released. So if you could show up for that, I greatly appreciate it. $2,000 tournament. Best players around the world, YCS champions, are automatically qualified for this event. And that's it. We'll see how the meta counters itself. If they're going to be maybe playing Sprite with Tearlament. A lot of people were trying that out before the Ishizu cards came out. In fact, that even won a tournament. Hope you enjoyed the guide, and I am out.